Accepting. All righty. So I have the privilege today of sitting down with Kalimah Redd-Knight of the League of Women for Community Service, based in Boston. My name is Angel Dye. I am the Shirley DuBois Creative in Residence for Castle of Our Skins for 2022-2023. And Castle of Our Skins has a really exciting event coming up in the next few weeks in partnership with the League of Women for Community Service. So I thought it would be wonderful to just have a conversation with Kalimah about the work that the League has done for so long, what they have going on currently, and what is coming up in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Kalimah now to talk a little bit about the League and its history. So Kalimah, welcome. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Angel. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I'm so excited to talk a little bit about the League. As Angel mentioned, I am Kalimah Redd-Knight. I am the president of the League of Women for Community Service. And so I just wanted to walk you through a few slides to help you understand a little bit more about the background of our organization, the history of our historic building located in the South End neighborhood of Boston, and a little bit about our collection. Hopefully all of this will help kind of paint a picture of the organization and explain why the League is a living piece of history and deserves to be preserved. So the League was founded in 1919 by a group of African-American women who were really the product of 19th century progress in the United States. Boston was a hotbed for abolition, and the women were, really organized at that time on a number of issues. But specifically right before the League's founding, they were considered a soldier's comfort unit, and they would render services to Black soldiers who were stationed in the Boston area. The Army was segregated at this time, and these women really stepped up and helped the men get back on their feet. So after the war, they saw a wider need to serve the Black community. So they became incorporated, and they purchased a building at 558 Mass Avenue independently in 1920. So this is a photo of the League's first president, Mariah Baldwin. She really was an extraordinary woman. She was famous for becoming the first Black person appointed headmaster of an integrated school in 1887. She oversaw a school in Cambridge called the Agassiz Elementary School. And she was overseeing a staff that was entirely white. 98% of her students were white. And she was the first Black person to have this position in the entire New England area. And she may have been the first African-American woman to be in a position like this, a position of such authority in the United States. But as far as we know, she was the first in the New England area. And the school that she ran really was a place where the children of Harvard educators, professors, brought their kids to school. And she was just a master educator. She was one of the first, if not the first, education leader to bring a school nurse into the building because she understood the importance of wellness. She had a parent-teacher group that she ran. She also attended Harvard and brought a lot of the pedagogy into the curriculum of the school. And she was just incredible. She was affiliated with that school for 40 years. And they actually ended up naming the school after her in the early 2000s. So she was incredible. And she really was able to navigate these progressive white spaces, but she also was very steeped into advancing African Americans at this time. And she really cultivated intellectual thought in that space. She had a literary group in her home in Cambridge where she brought in students who were at Harvard, Black students. So W.E.B. Du Bois would come to her home. William Monroe Trotter would come to her home. another gentleman named William H. Lewis, who eventually became one of the first African-American assistant attorney generals. So they would all come to her home and they would talk about Black intellectual thought. They would talk about advancing the movement. So she was able to excel in white spaces, but also be activist minded in Black intellectual spaces. And she was an incredible speaker. She also was very much a part of a group that focused on anti-lynching in education throughout the United States. During the summer, she would actually teach at Hampton Institute, which is my alma mater. So she was just a fascinating woman. So this woman is Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, and she was also extraordinary. She was an abolitionist. She helped put together the 54th and the 55th All-Black regiments out of Boston. And she also was very involved in the suffrage movement. She was very good friends with Julia Ward and also Lucy Stone. And she was involved with the club movement, the women's club movement, which was very prolific in the 19th century as a way for women to organize themselves and have like a vehicle to start to, legislate change. Increasingly, she became very focused on intersectionality before it became even a thing because of, the cross section that Black women represented between race and gender. She was the editor of the first newspaper by and for Black women called the Women's Era newspaper, which was a derivative of the Women's Era Club, which is a Black women's club. And she was the person who helped organize a colored women conference in Boston in 1895. And so these women were incredible. They really were just at the top of their game and made so much progress during their time. And so by the time they actually purchased the League, they had already sort of reached their peak. They were sort of already on the decline. But it really shows the importance of the continuum of a liberation struggle, and that struggle and continuing to push and advance civil rights for all really paid off when they purchased the building. So in addition to becoming a community hub where people could gather to, connect in various ways, the house that they purchased on Mass Avenue also became a boarding house, and it housed Black women who were coming to Boston to go to college and needed housing. And so one of the boarders that lived in the house was Coretta Scott King when she was at the New England Conservatory of Music, and where she very famously met her husband, Martin Luther King, who was also going to school in Boston, who also lived in the Mass Avenue area in the South End of Boston. So the League really filled in the gaps to make sure that their daughters were taken care of. And again, it's a continuum. They continue to push ahead and make sure that there was a physical space that would allow Black women in particular to have a sanctuary in many regards. So over the time, in addition to serving as a boarding house, the League became this remarkable space for the Black community. It was a place where you could have a wedding reception because, there was still segregation at that time. It didn't say whites only, but there was a lot of redlining. And so you could have an event, you could have a lecture. They had art exhibits, they had holiday concerts, they did charity work. They had plays. The League was very focused on arts and culture. So they, one of the later presidents actually organized a group called the Aristo Club, where they really focused on heroes in the Black community. And they had oration events where they would reenact certain speeches and famous moments, all sort of in a place of pride. It was a place of reverence and joy. And we think of joy as a resistance. The League was this space where they had multiple socials. We have very many anecdotal stories of couples that met at events that were held at the League. And so over time, the League has gone through a number of transitions. There were a lot of demographic changes in the neighborhood. Integration really opened up spaces for Black people to engage in different venues. So they lost a lot of revenue in terms of where people would host their events. People also were less likely to participate in something called a women's club. People were much more activist minded. So there were a number of changes that the League had to sort of soldier through or weather through. And so however, we're in a stage right now where we're really in a renaissance, and we're really focusing on embracing the history of the organization. And we're engaged in three main aspects. The first one is restoring our historic headquarters at 558 Mass Avenue, and it's a $5 million plus project. We're also really focused on illuminating and sharing more about our collection, which I'll talk more about. And I also will say, in addition to the League serving all of these different aspects of the community, the League actually had built a library of their own. Libraries were very important in the Black community because segregation really was still very much at play. So creating your own library was a huge part of really supporting the community, particularly young people. So we're renovating our historic building. We're focusing on our historic archive, which I'll talk about. And we're also looking to expand our connections to community and educational programming. And I will call attention, that image on the left bottom, that is a picture of Marian Anderson when she came to Boston in the 1940s. She had a meet and greet event at the League. And so these are the type of things that the League provided, a space to honor and celebrate our community. So this is just a list of some of the grants we've been able to put together in the last couple of years. We've gotten some supports from local and federal resources. We've made a ton of progress, but we have a lot of work to do ahead. So I'll just quickly go through what the building looks like. On the left side is obviously what it used to look like back in the day, and on the right is the current condition. We have a lot of work to do. We're focused on phase one of the renovation, which focuses on restoration of the windows and the brick and mortar facade, so the envelope of the building. And so this is some shots of the building inside. It was built in 1857 by a wealthy wood importer who really used the space as his showpiece. So he really blinged it out. And it was, at the time that it was built, was considered one of the most opulent buildings in the South End. And to this day, it is one of the very rare buildings that has almost all of its original features still remaining. So this is the shot of the entrance. This is the grand stairway. This is almost, well, not almost, but this whole area is comprised of entirely mahogany, which was all imported at the time from Honduras. If you look up, you'll see the sky parlor. Well, actually, this is not the sky parlor. There's another floor above this, but you'll see the stained glass window, which also needs to be restored, but you kind of get a sense of just the level of detail and opulence that the building really envelops you in when you walk in. So this is a shot of the grand ballroom, and this is where they had a lot of their major events. You can see a shot of the chandeliers, this too. All the chandeliers are imported from Paris. The mirrors, you can see a little bit on the right, are also all imported. They're 10 feet tall. The doorknobs are silver plated. The craftsmanship is remarkable. If you really think that people did a lot of this work, all by hand. And as it was very much in custom, a lot of the furniture was sold with the house when it was initially purchased. So William Carnes built the house in 1857. He sold it to a gentleman by the name of Nathan Farwell, which is now called the Farwell Mansion in many circles. But this is just another shot of the space. This is the newel post. There's a lot of custom details. This is said to be the owner's dog. It's an Irish setter. The marbles are all imported from Italy. And I don't know if you can see, but there's 3 figures, and those are said to be the owner's children. So I'll talk a little bit about the collection. So as I mentioned, the League actually had a parlor, and as part of the parlor, they had a full library. Mariah Baldwin lived until 1922, 2 years after she was elected president. And she actually was giving a speech in Copley Plaza and dropped dead right after the speech. So I always say, as amazing as she was, I'm like, self-care is very important. But when she died, the League really used it as a call to have authors send their books so that they could help build this library. And not only did that sort of prompt all of these incredible books, but people would bring their objects to the League. So it really became a community archive and repository. And so as a result, we have a number of letters, we have minutes, we have ledgers, we have photographs, we have ephemera, we have rare books and magazines. We were very fortunate to develop a partnership with Simmons University, which allowed the League to retain ownership of our collection. So it's a very important, component to retain those copyrights because having a collection costs money. You either pay for insurance or you lose ownership of it. So we were very fortunate to be able to retain ownership of our entire collection. So this is the marquee piece of our collection. This is a commemorative book called The Personal War Sketches, and this contains firsthand accounts of veterans from a group called the Robert A. Bell Post 134. And it's not uncommon to have this type of book, but what is uncommon is that this particular post has stories from veterans who served in the 54th, the 55th, and the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry, which were all Black. And the stories just really talk about where they're from, about the battles that they fought in, who they were under the command in, and some of the experiences that they had during the Civil War. Also interesting is that the book was put together by a woman named Pauline Hopkins. And I like to describe her as kind of the Shonda Rhimes of the 19th century, but obviously there was no television, but she really wrote romance novels, detective novels, but she incorporated social issues into her work. She was incredible. And she also, she was born in Portland, Maine, and then she lived in Cambridge. But she was a prolific writer and literary figure. And she would interview these soldiers and record their responses all in this book. And the book was sponsored by Mary E. Stearns, who was the wife of George Stearns, who was sort of the guy behind the scenes who put the 54th and the 55th together. So this is just an example of what the book looks like. So you can see it has the soldiers' names and it has their stories written on the side. And I'll just quickly read an excerpt from one of my favorite soldiers' stories. So this is from E. George Biddle. So it says, who was born the unknown day of AD 1846 in the county of Black Rock, state of Pennsylvania. He entered the service in 1863 in Boston, Massachusetts, in the 54th Regiment under the command of Colonel Robert Gouldshaw. He tells some very interesting experiences of his during the various encounters. In one of his skirmishes, he tells of one of his company members that was praying on the field in the dark. The Confederate war firing by sound, and this man was praying so loud that Comrade Biddle crawled over and told him not to pray so loud. But he prayed so loud, that Comrade Biddle had to slide away from him, and he had not gone far when a shot stopped him from praying. So you have these primary source eyewitness accounts that talk about these experiences. And for me, it's so haunting because you just realize that these were just young men caught up in this incredible conflict, and their stories are recorded all here. And a fun fact is Pauline Hopkins' stepfather fought in the war, and she actually interviewed him, and his story is in the book. So this slide captures some of the other components of the archive. We have about maybe 15 or 20 copies of the women's era paper. So it just talks about the women, detailing a lot of their work, talking about anti-lynching, talking about civil rights, talking about suffrage. We also have a copy of the Southern Horrors Lynch Law, which was a pamphlet that Ida B. Wells basically produced that really documented her investigative journalism work when she would go to the South and do these explorations to understand what is behind all of these atrocities that were happening, and really just castigated this notion that it was any fault of these young men that they were murdered. And she would have these copies and distribute them to her supporters to help sort of build the movement to stop these acts of terrorism from happening. So the League owns this copy, and as far as we know, there are 4 of these that exist. This pamphlet is online, but what is unique is that we have a paper copy. And I love this slide so much because it really does show that the women were really the keepers of the story. They were echoing one another in terms of really getting out what was happening in the country, and really on the forefront of pushing for change, despite the risk. This slide really illustrates a section of the collection that is pre-Civil War. So this gentleman on the right is Lewis Hayden. He actually escaped slavery from Kentucky with his wife and I think his stepson, and they made their way to Boston because Boston was a hotbed of abolition at the time. And he was really the key person in terms of helping house people escaping slavery and helping them, to another destination. He lived on Joy Street. And he would write all of these other folks, not only in Massachusetts, but outside of Massachusetts, to help connect the abolition community to really ultimately bring down this institution. And he is just amazing. He and his wife, Harriet, when he died first, and Harriet died in 1894, I believe. And so when she died, they donated their entire estate to Harvard Medical School to help Black students matriculate through Harvard Medical School. And as far as we know, that they are the only formerly enslaved people to leave their entire estate to an educational institution. And that scholarship still exists to this day. And, to me, that's so moving because it just shows how much they understood the power of education, that they could do anything with their finances, but they gave it to help students get through college and get their advanced degrees. So these are some other people involved. We have a letter from Frederick Douglass. This is C. Lennox Remond, who was also a prolific abolitionist based in Salem, Massachusetts. And that's George Ruffin, who was the first Black person to graduate from Harvard Law, who married, he was husband to Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin. So these documents represent some of our progressive era paper. So we have a letter from Booker T. Washington. We have some sort of Negro History Week ephemera from Carter G. Woodson, George W. Forbes. He was the first Black librarian at Boston Public Library. And we have a few letters from Mary McLeod Bethune, who also was in touch with the League quite a bit many years ago. Okay, and this is just a look at some of the art we have. It really honestly was a bit of we kind of joked that it's kind of the Black Anthonyum, because we have books, we have art, we have furniture. This is a bust of John Brown. Tufts actually has the original, which is marble. This is plaster, but there's probably maybe 5 of these that exist in the whole world, and the League has one. The image on the left, the sketch, this was done by a woman who was the first female graphic designer, or maybe then the only female graphic designer, probably the first, in the Black Panther parties in the 1970s. We don't know how it ended up at the League, but we have it. So I think this really kind of illustrates the breadth of the League that has holdings in the Black experience from pre-Civil War to the 1970s. So this is kind of where we are now. The group of us on the board are very active and really working hard to revitalize the organization. We had a small team that ran in the Boston Marathon. We received a drum major award from the Martin Luther King breakfast earlier this year. The Schlesinger Library is now doing a preservation project around the Civil War book that I mentioned. So they're preserving it, transcribing it, and digitizing it. We have a scholar who is at Simmons and also working with Embrace Boston to do some research on the women and the borders that stayed at the League. We had an archaeological dig in the building last fall to kind of understand the people who were in the area before the League purchased the building. So we've got a lot of exciting things going on. And that is it. So that's sort of a summary of the League. We're so excited to partner with organizations like Castle of Our Skins. It really dawned on me the other day that a lot of the work that Castle of Our Skins is doing is so similar to what the original founders of the League had, envisioned. And, I sort of thought, wow, like the League is kind of the physical embodiment of Castle of Our Skins. It's literally in some ways a castle where you could come in and be yourself and you could grow. And, I'm always struck by how like-minded and the through line that the League sort of provided to continue to create these spaces. I think what we're focused on, the fact is that the League was a physical space. It's still Black owned, Black women owned. We still have a Black women owned archive, and we're all Black women board. And so our focus right now is to, preserve that legacy. We stand on all of their shoulders. And so we're just so happy to be connecting with others with a similar goal. So thank you. That's it.
No, thank you, Kalimah. That was amazing. I just honestly, so many things that you said resonated very deeply with me. So I just want to say quickly that I'm a scholar of African American literature. So I am currently working on a PhD in English, and I study 20th and 21st century African American literature. I'm in the dissertation writing stage, and for my dissertation project, I am focusing on the literature of the Harlem Renaissance, more specifically rent parties. And so a lot of what you shared about the League and the people who have passed through it, the work that it has done, resonates so deeply with me, because there is this long-standing tradition in Black communities of creating safe spaces for ourselves, of Black women being at the forefront of social and political movements, of us being deeply engaged in the arts and in culture. And so much of that seems to be, intertwined with the League and what it has done and what it is hoping to continue doing, as is true for Castle of Our Skins. So I am just so happy to have a moment to chat with you. And honestly, you covered so much in that presentation. I really only have 3 questions for you at this point, but I wanted to acknowledge that you said you're a Hampton graduate and I am a Howard graduate. And I love connecting with other HBCU folks, because that is another, way, and I'm sure you can relate to this, another way in which, Black communities have kept safe spaces for ourselves, have created educational opportunities for ourselves when we weren't always allowed in other spaces that were segregated for whatever reason. So I don't think it's by accident that you are now at the helm of the League, and the work that it is doing with your Hampton education and your love for community and service. So it is really, really lovely to be talking to you today. So I'm going to start off with a question that is really more about your own personal opinion. There's so much work that the League has done. It has a long, rich history of community outreach. And I'm wondering, what are some of your favorite initiatives, past or present, that the League has taken on?
Well, I mean, I think I'll just say that from a personal standpoint, I grew up in Boston and I didn't know about the League. I went to elementary school in a very white part of the city, Beacon Hill, and I had no idea that blocks where I was in school, that there was this thriving Black community where people like Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin really did their work and ran shop. And I just imagine what my life might have been like had I known that, because, when we're in these spaces, it does feel very isolating. You often feel like you are the only one. And I think learning about the League and learning at just how powerful these women were and how they were so nurturing to each other and to their community, it's just been such a gift for me to learn about this history. And every time I, go into the building, every time I go into the library, or every time I, go through the archive, I learn something I didn't know. So I think for me, just learning about the League's existence and being a part of a team of people that are working to revitalize and share the story has been such a gift. I think, for me, I think once we started preparing the building for renovation, we went through the process of trying to clean the building out. And, the building had been in use, but kind of really had not really been quite as active as it had. And so going through all of the closets and the drawers, and then I'll just back up briefly. I actually was involved with the League in 2004 to 2012, and then I kind of stepped down. And then I was brought back on. One of the board members had encouraged me to revisit the organization. So I came back in March of 2021, and I was looking for something to do. This neighborhood has been through a lot of changes, a lot of gentrification, and there was a lot going on in the country. Also, George Floyd had been murdered, and it was the perfect call for me. So getting back involved, it's sort of been nonstop ever since then. So I've been really involved in helping prepare the building for renovation. And so as part of that, we discovered a lot of these objects. And then it became clear that, we might actually have some really valuable pieces. And so I work in an academic space, and I brought a couple of my colleagues over, and they were kind of like blown away. And then it just sort of snowballed, and being able to partner with Simmons was probably one of the best things I've ever been a part of, to make sure that the archive remained with the League was really important. Because I think the thing about the League and the whole concept, I would say, of having your own castle is ownership. Ownership. And when you own your own space, you can say what happens and what does not happen. And I think being able to have ownership is a huge privilege, which a lot in our community aren't able to engage with, and not even realizing how important it is. So I think for me, one of the most important projects that I've been involved with was helping the League retain ownership of our archives, and then discovering what is in the archive. And we just make new discoveries every day, because the archive was really uncatalogued. and finding a collection of works that's uncatalogued that had the level of significance that it has been like a gift that keeps on giving. And so our focus was to preserve it. So that was key, because it was literally in like drawers for decades. And then to figure out how we can find people to help support it and process it. And so a lot of that work is still happening right now. But I think that's been one of the greatest gifts I think I've been a part of, is to be able to help the League preserve its archive so it remains with the League. It's still a challenge because, again, it does cost money, but being able to have a say and to have authority about what happens to it is just so important. So I think that was one of the highlights I can say of my life in recent years.
Yeah, and that's a big one. I mean, you all really, just from some of the documents, artifacts, physical objects that you showed in your presentation, you all have a treasure trove
That's
there
what
at
it
the
is.
League. I mean, truly. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I know so many scholars who would, love to sit with your archives, dig deep in them, and come up with all kinds of projects, new possibilities. And so I think as you all, continue with your renovations and reopen, there are going to be scholars clamoring, to get into those archives. And I will be among them. I just think that you all have so many valuable things there that, who knows what possibilities await for us when we have the opportunity to sit with all that you have to share with us. So I think,
Yeah, well, I just think there's so many dissertations in the making right here.
yes,
So it is very exciting to me as someone who loves data and who loves research. That's not my background, but I work around scholars. So it's just so exciting to me. I could talk about it forever, and there's so many things that we don't even know, because it's almost like a fire hydrant, honestly. The women kept everything. And so, being able to go through those papers and build context and understand what was going on at that time. We have documents that we believe or have not really been seen outside of the League in years, or people had no idea what the relevance these items were. So it is very exciting to be a part of a project that is as big as this, but also very under the radar. I think most people you talk to in Boston have never heard of the League, and part of our goal is to change that and to revamp the organization, sort of repot ourselves to figure out, what do we do with this story? How do we continue on? What are we in this new version of time where we can be relevant and be a resource to the community?
yeah, and hopefully Castle of Our Skins will be able to help with some of that, with just, getting your name and your work out there, and the, project that you all have going on, the renovation project. Like, that is our aim. I think I can go ahead and spill this secret, which is that we are hosting a rent party soon. And the proceeds of that rent party will be going towards the ongoing renovations at the League. And so our aim in choosing to partner with you all was to do exactly what you just described, to let people in the greater Boston area and elsewhere know what you all are doing, all of the excellent, archival materials that you house, and also the plans that you have for the future once the 558 location is reopened and able to be frequented by the public. And so that's all we want to do, is play a small part in the very big work that you all are doing. So I'm putting that out there so that, when folks see this conversation between us, they are inclined to go to the website and look up, the work that you all are doing, and give money, donate, right? It takes money to do the kind of work that you all are doing. So I hope we can assist you in those efforts going forward. If it's all right with you, I'm going to stop your screen sharing just so that I can, see you, and everyone will be able to see you. And I'm going to jump back in with another question. And so as I just mentioned, we're hosting a Harlem Renaissance inspired rent party. Rent parties were a very long and ubiquitous tradition of hosting house parties that didn't begin in Harlem, but that got very, very popular in Harlem in the 1920s, out of Black people's necessity to survive, really. They were being charged much higher rents than non-Black families. They were being housed in mass, crowded into very tight apartment buildings, dilapidated buildings. And they came up with the idea of hosting parties, charging people a little bit of money to get in, providing the food, the music, the dancing for the evening that would help them to pay their rent for the month. And I've heard you talk about the League and all of the wonderful social events that it has hosted over the years. I wonder if it has ever been home to anything like a rent party that you know of.
I don't know whether that's what's happened, but I would not be shocked in any way if the women were involved in those type of efforts. There was really not a safety net years ago for many Americans, but most especially Black Americans. What the League was involved in very earlier in its history was a lot of charitable work, and they had a social worker that worked part-time for the organization because there were so many needs going on in the community. So they really put a lot of their efforts into helping the immediate area. There's actually a school behind the League where they distributed snacks, and at that time they called cocoa, but a lot of it was very nutrient rich cocoa. And they had this program where they did this almost every day during the Depression. And we have anecdotal stories of people saying, these are like 90-year-olds saying, we didn't have any food, but members of the League helped us get through that period. We have letters that the women, were writing. So if a senator voted for a Black, official in another part of the country, you'd get a letter from the League telling you that was a very good thing that you did. Or if children need, I'm thinking of a letter where they were advocating for glasses for a student who was having some sight issues. There was a letter from them sort of, not castigating, but basically writing to the Boston School Committee about songs that degraded Black people in their elementary school, little tales. And so they did all kinds of things to help improve the Black community. A lot of the sororities and fraternities had their meetings at the League. Jack and Jill was at the League. We have a lot of NAACP paraphernalia because they also use the League as a space to organize. So the League was kind of, a location where you could have an event that if you needed a little bit more pomp and circumstances, if you needed a professional space, they would bring people into the organization, into the building, and allow them to do the work that they needed to do. Again, so they had their library and they had so many activities that helped uplift the community because again, segregation during this time was very clear. There was a lot of redlining. That's part of the reason that Coretta was at the space, because they had such a small quota for Black students and she wasn't able to get in and find housing. So the League was able to step in. So the League was just a place where people were able to help function as an organization and really help the community grow and advance over a very challenging period in our history, when there were very clear restrictions about where you could go and where you could not go.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that just based on what you shared, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were some very fun parties that happened at the League alongside, the ongoing community efforts to keep other people other people's households thriving, right? Which is really like what the rent party was about. You might go to a stranger's apartment for a party, but in doing so, you were helping them to keep their household functioning for another month. And so that sounds exactly like what the league has been doing for so long, right? Making sure that other households, other communities could continue to thrive based on its efforts and its initiatives. And so I just love that. I do. So I want to close with a question that's really deeply tied to that and to everything that you have shared with us today. And that question is about community. So I want to ask you, Kalimah, what community means to you? How do you name it? How do you define it? Of course, we're all a part of this big global community. We belong to smaller communities, our neighborhoods, our workplaces, our churches, our schools. But what really is a community?
Yeah, that's such a profound question. It's so interesting. I've actually been reflecting on this idea of community and what is it and why is it important? And I think first and foremost, I think community is a place where like stories are shared. Like we share stories and they get circulated through this amorphous group called community. And we hold up the stories that we revere, we hold up our heroes, we hold up ways and norms that the community wants to follow. And I think one beautiful thing about the community that the League fostered was because it had a physical space, it could connect with the artist, it could connect with the intellectuals, it could connect with children. Right now, where we are with the League is that we have a connection to the historic architecture components and housing of Boston and New England. So you have the ability to create this special place, a safe space that brings all of these different components together where we can share ideas, share thoughts, have this like-minded approach towards a goal. And I think ultimately the goal of community and specific communities is to really enact the potential of freedom. And I think the community is a vehicle to reaching these lofty goals to help bring people along. And I think the League embodies that in so many ways. Whereas, you know, as I talked about how moving it is for me to consider the people can find where people can find sustenance and support to continue to thrive. So I don't know if that answers your question, but community is just such a profound and important vehicle, I think, to reach, you know, either personal or collective goals as a group. And I think both the Castle of Our Skins and the League represent really the meaning of community and what it could be to help people, you know, grow and be the best people that they can be individually and as a group.
Yes, you absolutely answered my question in more ways than one throughout this entire conversation, but yes, especially then. So I just want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to chat with me. And I want to encourage everyone who is going to see this to go to lwcsboston.org and read up more on the League and its history, its work, and also its ongoing renovation project. And consider donating, consider joining us for our rent party, which is upcoming on June 30th. More information about that to come from Castle of Our Skins. So you can follow Castle of Our Skins on Instagram at Castle Skins, or go to castleskins.org. And Kalimah, thank you, thank you, thank you. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we go?
No, I want to thank you so much and tell you how I've been doing some research on your work, and I'm going to go and buy your book, your poetry book, which looks amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time. And, again, I want to thank Castle of Our Skins for recognizing, the need and, reaching out to work with us. We're so happy just to know you. And I think this is exactly the goal of the league, is to connect with organizations, like-minded organizations, to support a greater experience for everyone in our community. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at the rent party and to staying in touch. I hope that we will continue to be connected. I love what you're doing at the league, and I want to continue being a part of that in whatever way that I can. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Angel.